Welcome back to the LGP21. In the previous two episodes, those episodes were absolute bangers. There is no way that I'm ever going to be able to top the excitement of what we were doing in those episodes, which was figuring out what was on the memory of this machine. This machine uses a rotating disk memory that is non-volatile, and all of the data from when this thing was in use in the 1960s at the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratories was still there intact on the disk. We saw references to the UHTREX, which is the ultra high temperature reactor experiment, as well as the sodium molten plutonium loop experiment. And as we dig through it, we're finding more and more exciting stuff. Like we found a reference to TNT. Like, why are they dealing with TNT? That's pretty wild. But ultimately, there was 4 tracks that we were not able to pull the data off of on this thing because it had bad heads. Now, we only had 2 bad heads, and that's because 2 tracks are interleaved under 1 head. And so we moved those over to the spare tracks, and the disk is now fully working, but the data on those 4 tracks was unrecoverable. Maybe. We're going to get into that a little later, but there is a priority list of things that have to happen here. And the first is that there's only like 2 episodes left before VCF Southwest. That's coming up on May 29th to May 31st, and this LGP21 is going to be at the show, hopefully fully up and operational for all 3 days. And so if you want to see it and come and use it and play with it, come down to VCF Southwest. Hopefully it'll be absolutely epic. Like I said, there's a priority order here because I think the CPU is probably going to be totally fine for all 3 of those days. But that Flexowriter, man. This thing has already given us plenty of grief. The power roller is blasted. It's like pretty much unsavable, full of cracks, and it just not in good shape. It's gonna have to come out and get recoded, redone, refurbished. I don't know what the correct word for that is, but that can't happen before VCF Southwest. There's just not enough time. So we just hit it with some rubbery new to kind of get it going well enough to hopefully get us to the end of the event. And then after VCF Southwest, I'll pull the whole thing apart and we'll send that off to get redone, and it'll be like brand new when it comes back. Also, there's a full-on camshaft in here with 4 lobes, and that was fully seized up. Nothing was working like it was supposed to, and we broke all that free, and that allowed us to start inputting and outputting and doing all the stuff that you're supposed to be able to do with this thing. But the problem we were seeing last time is that every time I would press 0 or W, it wouldn't shift the value into the accumulator, and the CPU would get stuck in this kind of weird loop with the stop light off. It was actually running. Every other key on the keyboard works. Everything works just fine. It's just 0 and W. And there's nothing unique about those 2 keys, at least from an electrical standpoint. Every single key on the keyboard actuates an encoder bar that makes or breaks contacts on the side of the machine, and this creates the 6-bit value that gets sent parallel over to the CPU. Now, when we're inputting into the accumulator, only 4 of those bits are read, and those 4 bits are not unique in 0 or W. So whatever it is has nothing to do with the encoding that's going on. But it also has nothing to do with the timing, because every other key kicks off the timing in the exact same way. It has to be something mechanical. When I press the key, it does actually type on the paper, but maybe the type bar is not engaging with the encoder bars correctly, or maybe it's not kicking something off. I don't know. Something is wonky. So I think our best bet is to pull all of the covers off of the Flexowriter, pull the encoder down, and just clean and lube everything again. Just a quick reminder, this Flexowriter weighs in at a ludicrous 85 pounds. That's about the same as 260 cinnamon rolls or 600 donuts. So if you're planning on going on a pastry binge, remember, lift with your legs and not your back. And actually, we don't really have these here in the States, but every time I go back to Japan, I gotta load up on Baum rolls. They're like bite-sized versions of what they call Baumkuchen, which that's really just a loan word from the German Baumkuchen. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but these are also sometimes referred to as tree cakes because they have rings that resemble a tree. And traditionally, it's baked on a spit roast by brushing on layers of batter. And during World War I, Karl Joseph Wilhelm Juheim found himself in Japan for reasons, but eventually he started baking Baumkuchen and even opened a bakery. Then there was a big honking earthquake and another world war. But after that, he and his wife opened up a chain of bakeries in Japan under the family name Yuhai, which not only made Baumkuchen one of the most popular pastries in Japan, that bakery chain is still around today. Oh, right, we're working on a Flexowriter. I gave the contacts a good polishing, though I'm confident the contacts themselves are not the problem here. I also gave the power roller another run with rubber renew, and while that soaks in, I want to wrap the cables that we made in the previous episodes properly. This is just spiral wrap that I picked up at the local hardware store, and I'll secure it at the end with electrical tape, but the rest is free to flex and move about. It was tedious work, but it was one of those things that I definitely needed to do. All right, I haven't changed much, but let's give it a try and see what happens. We're in manual input. If I go ahead and hit a 0, the stoplight stayed on. Up there, well, there it went. Oh, it's definitely a mechanical issue. What is that? Something is sticky. Oh man, okay. It's right. It's something's going on right here, right on the side. This is the 6-bit encoder, and if I hit something like the number 2 or the number 3, you can see that it encodes. Now watch when I hit 0. If I hit 0 here, they go forward and stay stuck. And there we go. We saw them kick back just then. They're slow. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they aren't. There's W, and you can see that they're stuck forward. And I don't know what's causing those to get stuck like that. Well, we're zeroing in on the problem at the very least. At this point, I'm like 99% certain that the problem is the power roller here. It's all cracked and gross and smooth anyways, and I think the only way to fix that is to get this thing refurbished, which we're gonna do, just not before VCF Southwest. So I'm gonna give it another sanding here, try to put a little key in it so that it'll grip the feet a little better, and then I'm gonna go over it with some more rubber renew here and let this soak in. So let's move on to the next thing that I wanted to try to get to, which was this rotating disk memory again. In the previous episode, we discovered that we were able to pull out 60 of these 64 tracks. We were able to dump those, they all read perfectly, and we've been going through the data and figuring out all sorts of amazing stuff. But those 4 tracks that we were unable to recover came back as all zeros. Now, it's a little tricky because there's only 32 heads on the disk. So that means that 2 tracks are interleaved underneath 1 head. So if a single head goes bad, you lose 2 tracks. And that's exactly what we saw. We lost 0001 and 2Q and 2W. Now the head for 00 and 01 measures out a little weird. I get like 38 ohms across half of the head, and it should be 17 ohms, which means that it's just high enough resistance that the amplifiers are probably not picking up anything. And also there's something tricky going on with 2Q, 2W, because even though it read as like 8 mega ohms to 10 mega ohms essentially open, that was measuring from one side of the head to the center tap. If we measure across the whole head, it tells a different story. The head for 2Q and 2W is right here on the very end. And if I put one probe on the center tap and measure from one side of the head to the other side of the head, my multimeter isn't even picking it up. But if I skip the center tap and measure across the entire head, you can see right there, 36 ohms. Actually, the coils of the head are good, and all that's happened is our center pin connection has failed. Now, I am not gonna dive in here and try to resolder that center pin connection. That's just a recipe for destroying everything else in here. But I could hook an oscilloscope across the entire head and potentially get the flux transitions off of the disc. Now, from a usability standpoint, this is a totally unnecessary step, because we were able to move the wire that goes to the bad head here and move that over to one of the spare tracks. We did the same for track 00 and 01 as well. And that means that this disk is 100% usable by the CPU. This is only to try and recover the data that was already on those tracks. And so if we pull out the scope and take a nice long scope shot of the entire revolution of the disk, capturing all of the flux transitions, and compare that against a clock signal, we can then go through and decode the individual binary bits on those 4 tracks and safely recover them. All right, I've got it spun up, and I've got a whole bunch of scope probes hooked up to it, and you can see that we have the CP signal. This should just be the bit clock, but the real trick is going to come with the rest of my scope probes here. So let's turn on number 2. This should be the sector address, and I'm going to have to readjust everything pretty dramatically here. And if I take a single shot of this, yeah, there we go. That, I mean, that looks like kind of what we're expecting to see of the sector address. Now, here's where it gets really exciting. Number 3, are we going to see raw flux transitions? And we are not. How about number 4? Are we going to see raw flux transitions on that? No, we are definitely not seeing raw flux transitions. That is a bit of a shame. Oh, wait, maybe. Uh-oh. All right. I just had my scales all messed up. Let's move that one down. Let's bring the scale on this one. Yes! That's a raw flux. Let's take a scope shot. Look at that. You can see the actual raw flux transitions. Oh, that's so exciting. All right, now I got to zoom this way out, far enough to get a couple of rotations of the disc, and then take a scope shot of that, and then we'll be able to see all of the raw flux transitions per sector address along with the bit clock. Let me go into a little more detail about what just happened, because the trickery that we just pulled off is a little mental. The head is essentially a single coil of wire with 3 taps on it, one on each end and one in the center. This tap in the center is where our fault is. It's not making a good connection to the upper side of the disc, but crucially, the windings of the head itself are totally fine. Now, I'm not going to take the disc apart and get in there and try to reattach this center tap. Way too dangerous. Puts the entire disc at risk of being destroyed. So we have to do something else a little clever here. And what we can do is we can actually isolate the head completely by snipping the diodes, making that head essentially floating, and then connecting our scope probe up to it. And now, whenever that disc is sliding by that head, if there is a change in the raw flux on that disc, it's going to induce a little bit of current into that coil of wire, and our scope will pick that induced current up. And we see that as these like little upwards or downwards blips. And that's because the raw flux is changing from one orientation to the next, or vice versa. And so if we can figure out how to time that correctly by putting another scope probe on the bit clock and the sector address, this tells us where the start of a sector is, where the end of a sector is, and then we can look at the raw flux transitions and figure out where the 1s and 0s are. Now this is the really tricky part, because there's a whole lot of bits, so there's no way that we're going to be able to do this visually. We need to be able to take that data and put it into some kind of file that we can then analyze with a modern computer. And that Keysight scope, massive shout out to Keysight for donating that epic scope. It does like 5 gigasamples a second, which means that I can zoom it out far enough that we get about 2 or 3 revolutions of the disc on one screen, and then I can do a single shot of that. And there's enough resolution in the quality of the shot that it takes for me to be able to zoom all the way in and see the individual flux transitions. So now I just need to save that to a comma-separated value file and store that to a USB. Now I've taken that comma-separated value file, combined it, and we can see it here on the laptop using a program called PulseView. Kudos to Roy for helping me get PulseView set up here and getting the CSV file combined so that we can actually load it into this application and view it. I've got the entire scope shot here in the program, and I can zoom in and zoom out and move around and look at the individual traces as if though it were on the actual oscilloscope. So how do we figure out what the actual data is by just looking at this scope shot here? Well, if we go over to our manual here, there's an outline of what the sector address S1 should look like. So now if we look right to left in our scope shot over here, we can find there's our 1 start bit, and then we have 1, 2, 3 0 bits, and now we start the strange sector address that has one of the bits always set to 1. Then we get all of our 0 bits, and now we have the real sector address, which is going to be 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, and then we have 2 zeros at the very end that line up with the least significant bit and the spacer. So now we know exactly which sector we're on. We know where the bits are lined up with. And so we can look at the flux transitions, and we can see that there's a spike downwards here. So that's probably a transition from a 1 down to a 0. So now it's going to be 0 for all of these bits until we see the next flux transition up. So 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, all the way until we get to this point. We see another transition that's going to pop us up to a 1, and that's immediately followed by another transition, which is going to pop us back down to 0, and then no more transitions for the rest of the word. So we've already figured out one of the missing 256 words that we weren't able to recover. Now, Reese has been doing some amazing work over on the Discord. He started working on writing a Python script to extract out the data, but using this, he's managed to pull out this data right here. This looks like legitimate, real deal LGP21 data to me. So what's in this data? Well, we don't know. We don't know yet. We haven't had time to analyze it. I am the living embodiment of just-in-time manufacturing. I'm very often still editing a video on Saturday night for release the next morning on Sunday. So the information that you guys are seeing in the video is often the newest, most up-to-date information. And well, you know, I'm still filming right now, and we haven't had time to analyze it. So hopefully next week we'll have a better idea of how this data fits into the larger picture as a whole, and we can figure out maybe if there's some interesting strings hiding out in here. Now, the only program that we've run on the LGP21 so far is the memory dump program, which is an awesome program because it exercises a huge amount of the machine, but it's not a very good demo program for an event. So the mad lads over on the Discord have been building up a collection of software that we can load into the LGP21 and run at VCF Southwest that should be pretty exciting to watch. And I want to load one of those programs up right now and see how it works on the machine. But the only way to load new software into the LGP21 is via paper tape. So I've got my laptop set up with their files on it, and I just need to punch them out on this paper tape punch right here, and then we can load it in. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hit enter. All right, I think I've got the bootstrap loaded in correctly. It was 8 words. I've had trouble typing that in the past, but I think this is correct. So I need to come into one operation, hit an execute, and then our program counter updates. And then I need to go to normal and hit start. Yeah, and it's starting to read in the tape. And that's not great. It stopped halfway through. That's a new one for me. Okay, that last program was a Sierpinski triangle. That's one of the demo programs that we wanted to run. So maybe we've got something wrong with the program or with the tape. So I've got a different tape loaded up. This is Fibonacci. So the bootstrap should still be in memory. I just got to get to it. So we got to do a 000 U3S00. And then I need to do a fill clear. And then I can fill that all in with zeros on the bottom there. And then we go to one op, execute. We see our program counter update. We go down to normal and we hit start, and it starts reading in the tape. We can see it shifting bits in and shoveling them into various parts of memory. It's so cool. Almost finished with the tape, and the typewriter has come alive. We did 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, K, 1, 5, 2, 2, 3, 7. It's doing Fibonacci in hexadecimal. So there we have it. The LGP21 printed out the Fibonacci sequence up to some incredibly large number. It's all in hexadecimal, and I can't make any sense of that. But I ran the program multiple times and it came back identical every single time, which is an incredibly good sign. There are more programs that I would like to run on this. We got to figure out what's up with the Sierpinski triangle. That's going to be kind of one of the main demo programs I want to run at the event. I also would like to run one-dimensional Conway's Game of Life, as well as a Mandelbrot set on this thing. So that way we have a couple of different demos that I can punch out interesting things and hand that out to people at the event at VCF Southwest. Now, talking about punching out, the typewriter is a bit of a hot mess, but it can actually do type outs totally fine. I probably need to change the ribbon. I do have a spare ribbon, new old stock ribbon over there, so I'm gonna take that with me. And then when we get back from VCF Southwest, we'll hunker down and figure out exactly what's going on. I think it's probably all in that power roller. Once we get the typewriter fully up and going, we're going to then figure out the reader and the punch on the typewriter, and then move over to the tally punch on this, and then that's it. The LGP21 will be 100% fully working at that point, which is really exciting. So next week, that's the last episode before the VCF Southwest event. We're going to be right back here, right on this machine, running those additional demo programs that I want to run, and probably doing a little bit of cleanup and small cosmetic things to get it ready for the show. So I want to thank you all so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope to see you next week.